Hi, thanks for joining me today. We're going to focus today on one of our basic foundation poses in yoga, downward facing dog. It's a very beneficial pose for building some strength in the arms and the legs and some length in the spine. Can be challenging for someone new to yoga or even someone that's been practicing yoga for a while. So I want to give you some alignment tips and some maybe modifications, ways that you can make it a little bit more beneficial for you. So the only thing you will need is a yoga mat or something non-sliding surface to practice on. And if you have a yoga block today, that would be great. You don't have to have a yoga block. You can use a couple of paperback books that aren't real heavy, like tied together, or even, I was thinking today, maybe even an unopened box of Kleenex tissues that are about that size. Too big. We're not going to be using it to support our weight. We're going to be using it to help bring a little bit more energy into the legs. So starting our foundation for our downward facing dog pose. So come to table pose to all fours. Spread your fingers wide. You want the wrists to be directly underneath the shoulders and the knees directly underneath the hips. So this is our starting foundation pose. And in this alignment, we want to make sure that the hands are, again, just directly underneath the shoulder. So we line up from the center of the shoulder down the center of the upper arm bone, the lower arm bone, center of your palm. We don't want the hands out too far or too close, because that's going to affect how the tendons and ligaments in your shoulder support you. So we want to think of a skeletal structure here. And you also want to think of weight in the thumb and the index finger of the hand. So if we let the weight roll out onto the pinky side of the hand, the elbows start to bend out to the side. And again, we lose that alignment and strength of our bones. So really press into the thumb and the index finger and think of rotating the inner eye of the elbow towards the front of your mat. They may only rotate towards each other. That's okay. You don't want to hyperextend them and roll them too far out. Some people are very flexible in their elbows, so make sure you keep that straight line as you think of rolling and rotating those insides of your elbows forward. So again, either towards each other or a little towards the front of your mat, but not around like this, because again, we lose the bend in the elbows. So from that foundation with the hands directly under the shoulders, keep that same alignment, and now bring your hands one hand print in front of your shoulders, because part of this pose is nice length in the spine, and we create that by creating a little bit more distance between the hands and the feet. So again, press into the fingertips, base of the knuckles, especially into that thumb and index finger. Curl your toes under, lift your knees, keep your knees bent for our first downward facing dog. Send your sit bones up and back. Imagine that the points of your hips, those hip creases, are reaching up towards the ceiling or sky. Keep pressing into the palms and the base of the knuckles to help take pressure off the wrist. That can be a tricky part for a lot of people. So a couple breaths here. Think of the crown of the head lengthening towards the hands, the tip of the tailbone lengthening up towards the ceiling or sky. Behind you, thinking of maybe if you're in a room, think of aiming towards the top of the wall and the ceiling junction behind you. Inhale and exhale, make sure you're breathing. And then gently release the knees back down to the mat and curl the toes to give yourself a little break when you're practicing downward facing dog. Fold back to a child pose, hips towards the heels, forehead towards the mat. You can always take that block or stack of books and let your head rest here if you need a little bit more support for the neck and for the length of your spine. Take a couple breaths, inhale and exhale, and then press into the hands. Inhale, come back up to your table pose. So again, from that same foundation, bring your hands a little in front of the shoulders, press into the fingertips, base of the knuckles, and again, think of this nice alignment here, and again, make sure the feet are hip distance apart. Curl your toes under, lift your knees, and then send those sit bones up and back. So we're starting again with that bent knee downward facing dog. Now straighten the right leg, just press down through the right heel, bend your left knee even a little bit more so we get a nice stretch through the back of the left leg, and then bend the right leg and straighten through the left leg. I might have said that wrong on the other side, but we're pressing and straightening through the left leg now, getting that nice stretch. And then bend the left knee once again, straighten the right leg. Feel that nice stretch from the sit bone all the way down to the heel, and then bend the right knee, straighten through the left heel, left leg. And then bend both knees once again, and then release the knees down to the mat. Uncurl the toes again, fold yourself back to that child pose. If you're feeling a little pressure in the wrist, maybe turn the palms up and give the fingers a little wiggle, the wrists a little wiggle, maybe a little circle of the wrist there. Make sure you're breathing. And then bringing the hands back to the mat. Let's come back again to our table pose. So the next variation, again, we're going to start with that foundation, hands in front, curl the toes under, feet hip distance apart, lift the knees, send your sit bones up and back. Find that bent knee, downward facing dog. And then slowly begin to straighten the legs, press. Think of weighting the heels down towards the mat. They do not have to touch the mat. Think of lifting the kneecaps in the front to engage the muscles in the fronts of the thighs. Now, if you find that you bend your knees and your back really rounds, if your hamstrings are really tight, then go back with that bent knee, downward facing dog, and work on baby pedaling through the feet and getting a little bit more length and stretch in the backs of the legs. But if you can straighten those legs and feel that still nice length in your spine, think of drawing the lower belly in and up. Make sure you're breathing. Inhaling and exhaling. And then release the knees down to the mat. Uncurl the toes. Fold all the way back again to your child pose. Again, take that break. Maybe the hands rest back beside the feet. Give a little release for the shoulders. Inhale and exhale. And then very gently, once again, let's come back up to our table pose. So now we're going to use that block for a little bit of emphasis on energy in the legs. So you're going to take your block, or again, if it's a couple books that are tied together, like lightweight paperback books, not heavy books, or again, this is about the size of a tissue box. You're going to take that and you're going to place it in between your thighs and have it in a comfortable position. So it's on the skinny side, so skinny side, side to side. And then bring those hands in front, curl your toes under, lift the knees, send your sit bones up and back. So you can do this with the knees bent or the legs straight, but we're really hugging the block with the inner thighs or whatever you're using for your prop here. And again, you can do this with the knees bent if your back rounds as you straighten the legs, or you can do this with legs straight. Inhale and exhale, but having something to hold on to really helps to energize those muscles in the legs. We want to feel most of our weight in our legs rather than our hands, which is tricky because we are, supporting our weight to some extent with the hands, but we want to think of more weight in the feet than in the hands. Inhale and exhale. And then once again, release the knees down to the mat and curl the toes. Before you take your child pose, go ahead and remove your prop. And then take again that child pose. Breathe into the back of the body. Inhale and exhale. Good. Another breath. Inhale and exhale. And then pressing into the hands, we're going to come up to table pose, So one more little modification or alignment help that I want to show you is to use our mat for a little support under the heels. So I'm going to take my mat and I'm going to do a little kind of a combination, little fold and little roll here so that I have a little bit more height in my mat. And then I'm going to have the hands in front. I'm going to have those toes right in front of that roll. And then as I come up, I'm going to have that roll of my mat to release my heels back down into with the legs straight as I'm dropping down through the heels. Inhale and exhale. You can also do this by just placing a folded up blanket or towel underneath the heels. Inhale and exhale. As I don't care how long I do downward facing dog, my heels are never going to come to the ground. That's just the alignment of my body, my structure, and my ankles. But this gives me something to press into and really helps me feel that nice length in the backs of the legs. And then very gently again release the knees down to the mat. Uncurl your toes and take your child pose. Couple breaths. Inhale and exhale. And then very gently coming up to a kneeling position. So I want to show you one last variation here, because we know that downward facing dog can be tricky and tough on the wrist. A modification that you can use for downward facing dog is actually dolphin pose, but it's downward facing dog from the elbows. So same alignment, we're in our table pose, and then we're going to take our elbow and place our elbow right where our hands were. And then I like to interlace fingers. You can also keep the hands, forearms parallel, palms to the mat. I feel a little bit more secure with my palms interlaced. And then I'm going to walk my knees back just a little bit. Curl the toes under, lift the knees, and then same thing, sit bones up and back, let the head release down between the arms. Now my head is not touching the mat, my hair is, but my head is not touching the mat. Knees can be bent or legs straight. So again, this is a great modification if you have issues with your wrist. You can also do a modification of downward facing dog with your hands on a chair. It gets you further away from the ground. Inhale and exhale, and then release the knees to the mat, release the hands, and again come to a version of child pose to take a breath and a break. Inhale and exhale, and then very gently bring yourself up to a comfortable seated position. So I hope you enjoyed that little session about downward facing dog. So downward facing dog is a pose that we use a lot in our flow practices and our vinyasas when we're moving from one practice to, or one pose to another. So sometimes we can kind of lose those little pieces of alignment checks. So good every once in a while to just practice specifically on downward facing dog, and I'm going to be doing a sequence or series of videos where we're focused on a pose or two to really find our alignment. So again, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you sometime soon in the saddle or on the mat. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like this video. Thanks. Bye-bye.